All right, welcome to episode 25 of Jack Colley's Black Book. We are still on page 3, and we are we're continuing to look at miracles. And the last episode, I had said that maybe we shouldn't be too impressed with Jesus. If Jesus was God, we would expect God to be able to turn loaves into fishes and feed 5,000 people, but we would also expect God to be able to feed 10,000 people, 15,000 people, perhaps everyone on the same planet. And so, a bit tongue-in-cheek, I indicated that maybe when somebody or something or some being does exactly what we would expect it to do, that we're probably not going to be really impressed if we really think about it. It's kind of like if I get up tomorrow morning and I want to make toast and I take the toaster out and I plug the toaster in and I put the bread in the toaster. This just came to mind. This is kind of scary. But I put the bread in the toaster. I press the lever down, and in a minute or two, up comes this toast. That just really does not impress me because the toaster is doing what the toaster ought to do. And so, again, I'm trying to be a little tongue-in-cheek, but I want to keep kind of pushing this idea that maybe there's more to miracles than this simple understanding of something being supernatural, something, usurping the laws of nature, the laws of physics, or however you want to look at it. So perhaps the real hero of the story of feeding the 5,000 was the little boy, who initially was the giver of the loaves and the fishes, which were used to feed 5,000. And I indicated and said that for me personally, I can get a lot more out of the story if I picture this little boy deciding in the moment to share what he was hoarding, to share what he was probably hiding for himself and his family, because that's what a lot of people do when they are in oppressive situations. They tend to hoard food for themselves and for others. And isn't that more of a miracle that not only did this little boy, this innocent little boy, who probably didn't appreciate the situation his family and those around him were in with the Roman oppressors, he chose to share, and through a rippling effect that inspired the people next to him to share and the people next to them to share. And there was just kind of this rippling effect that I can just kind of see in my mind, which indicates to me that I have the ability and the power to feed 5,000 people. I may not know that I do it, but just through those small acts of service that we do, we might be doing these incredible miracles without even realizing it. So that's kind of where I'm going here. I want to take a couple minutes and talk about oppression, and I want to talk specifically about extreme emotional stress. So looking at the psychology of what we perceive to be illness or sickness, which may actually be an indication of having to survive in a violent environment. So let's take a look at the Roman oppressors, and I just want to point out a few things. The first thing I want to point out is that when you have one group of individuals oppressing another group of individuals, so when the Roman Empire was oppressing the people that Jesus was with, and we're not talking about simple oppression. I mean, we're talking about things that I don't think the Bible does justice sometimes to really getting at the depth of what oppression like this would look like. We're talking about rape. We're talking about beating. We're talking about significant levels of violence. And it's referred to, I mean, we are, most of us are familiar with the crucifixion, for example, and most of us are familiar with the games and the blood games that went on in the Colosseums, where individuals were fed to lions, and there were organized hunts, or lions or bears, and they were usually the marginalized people, usually the people that Jesus went after, that Jesus, ministered to or befriended, were the individuals that were put in the Colosseums to be tortured, beaten, eaten alive, made to kill each other, survive. I mean, all of these horrendous things, not to mention individual situations that are not recorded in the Bible, which I'm sure existed, which would be like raping the individuals, raping other individuals, things like that, that we have to be aware of. If you think about some of these acts, crucifixion in particular, and I struggle with this because I try to think, sometimes I think to myself, okay, what do humans do that can be seen in the animal kingdom? Like what things can we attribute just to being kind of connected to the animals through evolution? Because that at least helps me understand, some human behaviors. If I can say, well, we evolved from animals and sometimes we act like animals. But an interesting thing to me has always been, it seems like humans are the only species or the only organisms that I can identify that we know how to, gosh, how do I say this? We know how to make something suffer simply to cause pain. We know how to draw things out simply to torture another human being. It's pain for the sake of pain. It's pain simply to oppress and push somebody down. And I don't know that I see that in any other animals. I know sometimes like I see cats playing with their food, and I'm not too sure, though, that the cat is of the mentality that I'm going to make this thing suffer. I think it's just a game. But with human beings, like we deliberately devise ways to cause pain. Whether you're talking about Auschwitz, or you're talking about Maruta, or you're talking about the Japanese torture camps, whether we actually devise ways to cause our fellow human beings to suffer and experience pain, and somehow we get something from that. So it is significant to understand that the people that Jesus was with, they were experiencing not sometimes this simple image that we get that, you got the Roman soldier and somebody's going to force you to walk 2 miles with them instead of 1, and they might slap you on the cheek, and you got to turn the other cheek. A lot of that is, I think, kind of trivializes what likely really happened during the Roman oppression. So what I want to talk about 2 characters, I guess, in the narrative. And one is the woman who had bleeding. Her bleeding was not under control. In other words, her menstrual cycle was somehow messed up. And I also want to talk about the man by I think it was the pool of Bethesda. I don't have any notes, so I don't know how to say that. But he was by a pool where people hung out, and they were hoping to get cured. And he was said to be lame and laying on his mat. So in these 2 situations, so we have a woman who was experiencing bleeding that would not stop, and then we have a man who could not walk. I want to make a suggestion here. When individuals are surviving in a traumatic situation, when they are surviving in an oppressive situation where they're simply holding on to life, a lot of times what happens is there is a stress response. And sometimes with a stress response, the human body is going to have significant changes in cortisol production. And when the production of that chemical gets out of whack, I guess, your hormones get messed up. And so this stress response that is so unnatural and scary, and you're being victimized, and you're living a life of fear. So 2 things happen. In women, it has been researched that we know the menstrual cycle gets really messed up. And so we have a woman in one scene of the New Testament who is following Jesus and wants to touch Jesus's cloak, or I call it a toga, but she wants to touch Jesus, and she has faith that if she simply touches Jesus, that her bleeding will be cured. And then we have the other situation is we have a man, and I'm going to suggest that he was in a catatonic state. Because of the stress he was under, the level of fear, he was unable to move because of the fear that he was experiencing. That this was not something physical. This was not an individual who had a back injury or a neck injury and was a quadriplegic or a paraplegic. I'm going to suggest that this individual was in an actual catatonic state. Here's a picture. Here's a painting. Let me go here and get this a little closer. I found this, I had to lighten it a little bit, so hopefully it's not too washed out. But here we have Jesus leaning in and leaning toward the man on the mat when Jesus says, take up your mat and walk. And this individual, according to the story, takes up his mat and walk. I want to suggest that catatonia, the inability to move because you are living in such intense fear and trauma, was what this individual was suffering from. And I want to suggest that in both of these situations, with the woman who wanted to touch Jesus and the man who was in a catatonic state, unable to move, they just needed hope. And that is what Jesus gave them, was the hope that they had value, the hope that things would be okay, the hope that the Roman oppression would eventually end. Jesus gave people hope. It was hope that Jesus gave them. Now, it was still, I think, them that, they took that hope and they realized that they could walk again, or they realized that they did not have to necessarily live in intense fear, and that is what cured them. Now, again, that does not make Jesus any less amazing, but it is to acknowledge that if you're not an individual who believes in supernatural works, if you believe that, science has to kind of be respected, then sometimes we can sit with these stories and we might find interpretations of these stories, and in this case, these miracles, that might help us appreciate them more. And in the next episode, I'm going to take a look at how maybe having that appreciation will help us to believe that we have, even as individuals, we have the ability to get people to walk. We have ability to change people's bleeding. We have the ability to feed 5,000. So that's kind of where we're going to go next time. All right. Namaste, my friends.